Wyoming Territory, 1883, just past the first frost. When the land turned brittle and quiet, Loretta Tilden stepped off the stagecoach in the dry, wind-bitten town of Red Bluff with 2 children at her side, and a revolver tucked in her coat she prayed she'd never have to use. She was 24, widowed, and worn thinner than the soles of her boots. Her late husband's debts had chased her clear from Missouri, and now she was here looking for work, not trouble. But the way the saloon doors swung open across the street and the way boots thumped heavy on the boards. Trouble might have found her anyway. "Ma," said her son Mason, tugging her coat. He was 8, his hand cold and small in hers. His sister Maribel, 5, clutched a rag doll with one button eye and didn't speak. She hadn't since the night they fled the farm. "I see him," Loretta whispered. The man stepping out of the saloon had a body built for saddle work and gunfights, with dust on his hat and a revolver at his hip. A scar nicked the side of his jaw, and the way he moved loose, like he was ready for anything, made her spine prickle. He looked too much like every kind of trouble she had sworn to avoid, but then he looked straight at her and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that charmed. It was slow and sure, like he knew who he was and did not apologize for it. He crossed the road with a casual stride and stopped a few feet from her, tipping his hat. "You look like you walked through hell to get here," he said. "Name's Quince Adler." She didn't answer right away. She glanced at her children, then back at the man. "I do not want trouble," his grin deepened. "Darlin, I am trouble, and I am yours." Loretta blinked, stunned still by the boldness and the heat behind his eyes. "I think you have mistaken me for someone who still believes in that kind of talk." "I have not mistaken you for anything," Quince said. "I saw a woman with a steady eye and a gun under her coat. You are protecting those kids. That tells me everything I need to know." Her chest tightened. "You do not even know my name." "Not yet," he said, "but I aim to." She turned, pulling her children toward the boarding house. "Then you can aim somewhere else." Except he followed, not close enough to cause alarm, but there was no missing the sound of his boots. He stayed that way all the way down the street, past the general store and the church and the smithy. When she stopped at the edge of the porch, he stopped too. "Why are you following me?" she asked. "You look like someone who could use a friend." "I have not had one of those in a long time," she said. "Maybe you are due." She looked down at Maribel, who still had not said a word, then at Mason, who stood too still for a boy his age. "Are you from here?" she asked. Quince nodded. "Born about 20 miles out. I work cattle when I have to, ride fence when I want quiet. I have land out past the ridge, nothing fancy, just mine." She studied him. "You are not a lawman." "No, ma'am." "Then you have no business helping me." "I make my own business." She opened the door and stepped inside without another word, but Quince did not leave her alone. The next day he was there when the boarding house keeper refused her rent for lack of funds. He handed the woman coin without asking Loretta's permission. When she tried to protest, he just said, "Let me." The day after that, he brought a basket of food: warm bread, dried meat, apples that still held the taste of fall. Mason's eyes lit up. Maribel reached for a slice of bread with shaking fingers. Loretta stood frozen, unsure whether to thank him or throw the whole basket at his chest. "Why?" she asked him later, once the children were asleep. Quince sat on the steps outside the boarding house, arms resting on his knees. "Because I have been alone before, and I know what it feels like when no one helps. You do not even know me. I saw enough. Maybe I am not worth it." He looked at her then, really looked. His voice dropped low. "You do not get to say that kind of thing in front of me." She turned away, heart hammering. He made her feel seen in a way that was dangerous. She had not been seen like that in a long time. 2 days later, trouble came. A man rode into town with a long black coat and a scar above his brow. Daniel Finch, one of her late husband's creditors. He had followed her all the way from Missouri. She saw him across the street and froze, her fingers curling tight around Mason's shoulder. "That is him," she whispered. Quince stepped out of the smithy just as Finch dismounted. Their eyes locked. Finch reached for his gun. Quince was faster. The shot echoed like a thunderclap. Finch staggered, fell to the dirt, and did not rise. Loretta dropped to her knees, pulling her children close. Quince crossed the street and stood in front of her, breath steady. "You came looking for peace," he said. "Now you have it." She stared up at him, her face pale. "You killed a man for me." "No," he said. I killed a man who was going to hurt you." "That is different." The sheriff arrived moments later, but Quince's name carried weight in Red Bluff. Witnesses stepped forward. The sheriff took the statement, then left without cuffs. Still, Loretta's hands shook. That night, Quince waited on the steps again. She sat beside him. "You scared me," she said. "I scared myself." She looked at him in the dark, the way the starlight caught the edge of his cheek. "You meant what you said about being trouble." "I did," she swallowed. "And the part about being mine," he turned toward her, voice rough. "Every word." She leaned in, slowly, uncertain, until her head rested against his shoulder. He did not move, just let her lean. "I still do not want trouble," she whispered. "Then we will make peace instead," Quince said. "One day at a time." And Loretta, for the first time in years, let herself believe that maybe peace was something she could choose. And maybe, just maybe, love too. The first snow came early that year, soft and wet, clinging to windows and rooflines like a hush over the town. Loretta watched it fall from the back porch of the boarding house, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of chicory brew. Her coat was too thin for the wind, but she stayed out anyway, needing the stillness. Behind her, Mason helped Maribel button her wool cloak, careful and quiet like a boy grown too fast. Quince knocked once on the frame before stepping around the corner. His coat was lined in sheepskin, shoulders dusted with snow, and he held a wrapped bundle under one arm. "Brought something," he said. She raised a brow. "You already brought bread and coin and nearly got yourself hung last week. What now?" He unwrapped the bundle and held out a pair of small leather boots. "Made by hand. My sister's boy outgrew him. Figured your girl shouldn't be barefoot come December." Loretta stared at the boots. The stitching was worn but careful, the soles thick enough for snow. She took them without speaking, fingers brushing his. He looked down, then back up, eyes steady. "I didn't know you had a sister. Half-sister." "Annie, lives up near the canyon ridge. Got 3 little ones and a mule with a limp." "You close," he shrugged, then sat on the porch rail, boots creaking. "Used to be. After her husband passed, she got too proud to write. I check on her when I can." Loretta leaned against the post. "You ever been married?" "No." "Why not?" Quince's jaw worked a moment before he answered. "Didn't know how to be good to anyone back then. Spent too many years looking for fights, chasing drink. I was meaner than I had to be." "You're not mean now, not anymore." They stood in silence until Mason peeked out the door. "Ma, Reverend Price says if you're willing, he's got work at the church school," he said. "He said to come by before supper bell." Loretta nodded. "Tell him I'll be there soon." The door closed again. Quince turned his face toward her. "You thinking on staying?" She hesitated. "If there's work and no one else comes looking to settle my husband's debts, I might." He didn't push. Just nodded and rubbed his thumb along a scratch in the porch rail. "I've got a line on some winter cattle work," he said after a while. "Couple weeks up past the divide. Could bring back extra. Meat, maybe a quilt from Annie. You don't owe me more. I don't keep ledgers for kindness." She met his eyes, then stepped closer. "You were right," she said. "I did walk through hell to get here, and I don't know how to stand still anymore. I keep waiting for the next fire." Quince lowered his voice. "Then I'll sit with you till it passes." She looked down at the boots in her hands, then back at him. "You ever think about what comes after the storms?" "Sometimes," he said. "Looks like a warm stove, hands that know yours, and someone to rest beside who doesn't flinch at old ghosts." Loretta felt something shift in her chest, something quiet but sure. She didn't reach for him, not yet, but her voice softened. "You always talk like you already see the ending." "I don't," he said. "But I know how to walk beside someone till we find it." From inside, Maribel's voice called her name, soft and uncertain for the first time in weeks. Loretta stepped back, the boots still in her arms. "I have to go," she said, "but I'll come by before you ride out." He didn't move to stop her. "I'll be at the livery. Come when you're ready." She nodded once, then disappeared inside. Quince stood alone on the porch for a long while, watching the snow settle over the town like a promise not yet spoken aloud. The wind had changed. Loretta felt it before she heard it, threading through the bare cottonwoods like a whisper of what was coming. She stood near the churchyard fence, her arms wrapped around herself, watching Mason help Reverend Price carry firewood into the schoolhouse. Maribel sat on the chapel steps beside the Reverend's wife, cradling a wool rabbit someone had sewn from leftover scraps. Behind her, boots scuffed against frost-hardened dirt. "You said you'd come before I rode out." Loretta turned. Quince stood a few steps away, saddlebag slung over one shoulder, gloves tucked in his belt. His horse waited near the hitch post, breath misting in the cold. "I didn't forget," she said. He nodded once, but his eyes searched hers with a quiet wait. "Didn't saddle up yet. I can see that. I was waiting to see if I'd be riding out alone." She stepped closer, fingers tightening around the fence rail. "You won't be gone long. 5 days, maybe 6. Depends on how deep the snow sets in." She hesitated. "Mason's taken to the school. Reverend says he's sharp with numbers." "That doesn't surprise me," Mary bells. "She's still quiet, but she's drawing again." "That's good. And I've taken the work, teaching letters to the younger ones, sewing for the older girls who help run the house." He didn't smile, just nodded like it settled something in him. "You've found your place here." "I'm trying to." He adjusted the strap on his shoulder. "I've got a bunkhouse out past the ridge, small but tight against weather. Smokehouse behind it, creek not far. Could use another pair of hands come spring. You offering work?" "I'm offering more than that." Loretta looked down at the packed dirt between them. "I don't know if I know how to be part of something steady." Quince's voice dropped. "You already are. You just don't see it yet." She blinked against the cold. "I've spent the last year just trying to keep us fed, keep us moving. I've forgotten how to let anything last." "Then remember with me." Her throat tightened. She stepped up until her gloved hand brushed his coat sleeve. "Promise me you'll come back." "I always come back to what's mine." She reached inside her coat and drew out a small square of cloth, edges stitched with tiny red thread. It wasn't much, just a handkerchief with initials embroidered in one corner. She held it out. "For your pocket. In case you need reminding." He took it without a word, tucked it carefully into his vest. Then he leaned in, slow and deliberate, and let his brow rest against hers. No sudden moves, no words to fill the space. When he pulled away, he touched her chin lightly. "I'll see you before the creek thaws." Loretta watched him ride out, the snow kicking up behind his horse's hooves, and didn't look away until he disappeared into the trees beyond the ridge. That night, after the children were asleep, she pulled her rocker close to the stove in the boarding house parlor and worked on a patchwork square for a quilt that didn't yet have a home. Her stitches were careful, her eyes steady. She didn't know what the next storm would bring. But she knew now what waited on the other side. The sun crested late and pale over the ridge, casting long blue shadows across the snow-drifted road that led out of Red Bluff. Loretta stood at the edge of the boarding house porch, a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, watching frost feather across the edges of the window glass. Maribel sat close behind her, feeding bits of biscuit to a black and white cat that had taken to sleeping beneath the porch. Mason was off stacking wood behind the schoolhouse, bundled so thick in his coat he moved like an old man. It had been 5 days. Each morning she'd walked to the edge of town and looked toward the horizon. Each evening she'd returned, hands empty. On the 6th morning, she didn't go. Instead, she stitched a hem on a boy's shirt someone had left with her the week before, her needle slipping through the flannel in steady rhythm. Her fingers had warmed to the work, but her thoughts drifted. She didn't hear him arrive. Only when the door creaked open and Mason's voice came breathless from the hallway did she look up. "He's back, Ma. He's out at the well." She set the needle aside and stood. Outside, Quince was leaning against the pump handle, his hat low over his brow. His coat was damp at the shoulders, boots caked in half-frozen mud. There was a fresh scrape above his temple and a tear near one cuff that looked half-sewn. "You're late," she said. "Snow caught us past the ridge. Had to double back and waited out in a trapper's shack." "I told you to come back," she said, stepping down the porch steps. "I never meant to do otherwise." She stopped in front of him, her eyes fixed on the scrape. "You're bleeding." Mule pitched when the wind rolled in. "I stayed up most of the night calming her." "You didn't think to send word." "There wasn't a soul between the canyon and here. If I'd tried, I might not have made it at all." She reached up and brushed a bit of dried blood from his brow with one thumb, slow and deliberate. "You're colder than stone. Come inside." He followed her without a word. In the kitchen, she filled a basin with warm water and set it on the table. He sat, peeling off his gloves and coat, revealing a bandage wrapped low around his wrist. "What else?" she asked. "Bruised ribs, maybe cracked one." "Got caught between the gate and a steer with more attitude than sense. You need rest." "I will once I know you'll listen." She turned, drying her hands on her apron. "To what?" "I saw something out there," he said, eyes steady. "Not tracks or signs, something in me. I was laid out on that cabin floor, ribs screaming every time I moved, and all I could think was I'd left you standing with a promise and nothing to hold." Loretta sat across from him, arms folded on the table. "I don't want a man who rides in and out with the seasons," she said. "My children have seen enough of leaving. I want to build something," he said. "Not just a roof and walls, something that doesn't break when the wind changes. You're talking about more than bunking me on your land. I'm talking about marrying you, Loretta." She blinked, mouth parting. "You haven't even asked." He leaned forward, wincing slightly. "Then let me." "No," she said, voice gentle. "Not until I'm sure." He didn't flinch. "Fair. I need to know you'll be here when the thaw comes, when the children are sick, when I lose my temper. When the days stretch long and there's nothing but laundry and sore backs and the smell of lye soap. I will. You can't promise that. I can promise to stay," he said. "Through all of it." She stood and poured him a cup of coffee, then sat again, setting it down in front of him. Her hands trembled just slightly. "I don't know how to be someone's wife anymore. Then we'll learn it slow. No rush, no grand plans, just the days as they come." She looked down at the table, then back up at him. "You'll need a warmer coat. I figured you'd tell me that, and better boots. I'll ask Annie to send more." She reached out and took his hand, his fingers calloused and stiff with cold. He didn't squeeze, just let her hold on. "We'll see," she said softly. "But don't ride out again without telling me where you're going." "I won't. And next time you bring home a wound, I expect the truth, not half a story. You'll have it." The cat skittered in from the porch then, shaking snow from its paws and leaping onto the hearth. Maribel followed behind, her wool skirts brushing the floor. She paused in the doorway, peering at Quince, then padded over and laid the rabbit doll gently on the table beside him. "For you," she whispered. Quince blinked once, then picked it up with care. "Thank you, little dove." Loretta watched him hold the stitched toy like it was glass, and she felt something in her chest unclench. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And when he came back the next morning with a new hammer and a bundle of cedar posts tied to his saddle, she didn't send him away. The thaw came slow that year, more a long breath than a turning point. By mid-March, the snow had shrunk into the shaded gullies, the roads turned soft underfoot, and the cottonwood buds swelled with the promise of green. Loretta stood at the edge of Quince's land, skirts brushing wet grass, her eyes on the half-framed cabin rising near the tree line. He hadn't asked again, not with words, but each day he worked beside her, cutting boards, hammering joints, measuring twice before the saw came down. He'd cleared space behind the cabin for a garden, marked a spot for a chicken coop, and offered Maribel a small patch to plant whatever she liked. She'd nodded once and then spent 2 days picking pebbles from the soil. Mason had taken to trailing behind Quince, not with questions, but with quiet mimicry. He copied the way Quince tied knots, watched how he drove fence posts, and carried lumber with a determination too big for his small frame. This morning, Loretta brought coffee in a tin pail, still warm from the stove. Quince was kneeling beside the front steps, adjusting a beam, his coat shed in the warming sun. She set the pail beside him and waited while he wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "You're favoring your left side," she said. "Only when I breathe wrong. Doctors say anything about it healing crooked." He said to stop sleeping in the hayloft like a mule and maybe I'd heal straight. "You take his advice, some of it." She crouched beside him, adjusting her skirt out of the wet. "You've near built a house." "We've near built a house," he corrected. "I haven't done half what you've done. You've done enough," he said, looking at her. "Sometimes just staying is the harder part." She didn't answer, but her hand found his on the edge of the unfinished stair. They stayed like that a while, warm skin against calloused palm, until Mason's voice called from the trees. "Found the mule. She's caught up again." Quince stood with a quiet groan. "That animal's got a talent for trouble." Loretta followed him to the edge of the brush, where the mule stood tangled in a low thicket, looking entirely unbothered. Quince coaxed her free with a handful of oats, then led her back with Mason holding the halter. "They listened to you," she said once the mule was tied off again. "They listened to you more." She looked up at him. "You still sure about all this?" He didn't hesitate. "I was sure before I built the hearth," her voice lowered. "I've got no dowry, no fine linens. Just a name folks half remember and 2 children who have learned to sleep light." Quince stepped closer. "I don't need linens. I need you. I need the way you sweep your hair back when you're thinking, the way you keep a ledger sharper than any banker I've known. The way you hold that girl when she wakes crying and never once flinch." Loretta's throat tightened. "I never thought I'd be loved for the hard parts. I've only ever trusted folks who knew how to endure." She reached up and touched the side of his jaw. "Then marry me, not next week. Not after the planting. Now." He didn't speak, just pulled her in, arms strong and sure, and kissed her like the wind had stopped blowing through the pines. When they pulled apart, his eyes were damp. "I'll find the preacher," he said. They were wed beneath the cottonwoods 3 days later, with Reverend Price reading from his worn Bible and Annie standing behind Loretta with a hand on her shoulder. Mason wore a clean shirt and freshly combed hair, his face solemn. Maribel clutched the hem of Loretta's dress and didn't let go. There was no music, but someone hummed a hymn. The sun came through the trees like honey. That night they sat inside the half-built cabin, a fire flickering low, quilts spread across the floorboards. "You think they'll be all right here?" Loretta asked, nodding toward the corner where her children slept on a mattress of straw and wool. Quince laced his fingers through hers. "They've got more now than they ever did." "And so do we." Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawed earth and pine bark. Inside, the warmth of the stove and the hush of sleeping children wrapped around them like a promise. Loretta leaned her head against his shoulder. "I didn't think I'd ever be still again." "You're not still," he said softly. "You're rooted." And she believed him. They planted in April. Lettuce and beans, onions and squash. Maribel chose wildflowers and an apricot pit she'd hidden in her pocket since last fall. Mason helped fence in the chickens, and Quince taught him to trim hooves and mend tack. By summer, the cabin stood finished, smoke curling from the chimney, sunflowers leaning against the porch. Loretta taught at the school in the mornings and stitched by lamplight in the evenings. She laughed more. Quince built her a rocking chair and carved her name into the back. One night, as the fire dimmed and the children slept, Loretta laid her hand over Quince's and whispered, "I never thought I'd have a home again." He kissed her temple, his voice thick with sleep. "You are my home." And they never left. Their life was quiet, but it was full. The kind of full that grew slow and deep without flair or fanfare. Just the long, steady burn of 2 people who had walked through ruin and found each other whole on the other side. They lived many years in that cabin. And they were never alone again.